What we've come up with is we're thinking of an idea that Crawshay was obviously a very successful industrialist, and we're going to use the angle maybe of the way that he raped the earth of the natural elements of iron in order to build an opulent life, you know, the life that the grandeur and everything, as opposed to the life of the people, the workers, and the extreme opposites.
Right.
It's like a juxtaposition of somebody who's terribly wealthy and the ones that weren't. And I just wanted to pick your brains about what sort of relationship he had with his workers and how did he treat his workers, that sort of thing.
First off, you're referring to him as a singular person.
Is it Bacon as well?
No, there's a dynasty of Crawshay members. So you've got Bacon who predates the Crawshays.
Was this number two?
But then
second?
you've got William II who lived
Right.
there, but also Robert Thompson Crawshay, William Thompson Crawshay, and then Richard who predated those two as well. So it's finding out which Crawshay you want to factor in on, because each were different.
Okay,
as well.
so who actually built this building?
William Crawshay II built
William
this one.
right, that's the one then. So he started the business, is that right?
No.
No.
His grandfather bought the business of Anthony Bacon essentially in 1786, and then extended it and kind of went to town on it and made it into the world's largest ironworks by 1800 essentially. There was no bigger in the world.
And what was the situation when it was first set up? What was the dynamics like?
Dynamics of the town, you mean, is it? Or?
Of the workers versus the owner?
There was no verses for a start. You look in the first trade unions in Merthyr were 40 or 50 years off being set up and put into place this time. Workers' rights were a thing really of the future and not really considered.
The conditions then?
People were flocking to the town because conditions in the town were far more beneficial in a lot of ways than they were outside of the town. Now what I mean by that is the agricultural communities around the borough of Merthyr, so in Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, the agricultural communities were being affected very badly by depressions and other things like that. And so they were coming to an area that had vastly higher wages than what they were getting elsewhere.
What period are we talking about?
We're talking 1800 to 1820, the period where Cyfarthfa Ironworks was the biggest in the world, essentially. And so, basically, the iron trade was the best paid industry that a working class person could work in Britain overall. There was no higher paid industry for a working class person to work in. Even agriculture for a working class person wouldn't pay nowhere near what it would today, unless you owned your own land, etc., that type of thing, which very rarely working class people did.
What were the working conditions like then for the workers?
Working conditions were, well, it was, the working conditions were bad by our standards, totally bad by our standards, because by their standards they were fairly what they were used to, essentially, to a certain degree. But you're talking, you would work, if you were working at the furnaces, you would work between 8 and 12 hours. Every day pretty much for 5 or 6 days a week. If you were working at other parts of the works, you might work 12-hour shifts or even longer. But the working conditions were, living conditions were probably worse than working conditions to a certain degree, because once you're a skilled worker working in that environment, so you've been there for a while, you've established, you know the area, then it's a fairly, it's not much of a dangerous environment, but obviously you've got furnaces burning white hot heat every day, all day next to you, so there's a lot of damage being done to your eyes, for example. You've got hammering and different mechanics going on around, machinery rather, going on around you, so there's lots of hammering and loud noises constantly, as well as the furnaces making loud noises. So deafness was quite prevalent as well, so blindness and deafness could occur fairly regularly. But epidemics and diseases and things like that came more from living conditions. So working conditions, they were hard physically, but again, if you were a physically fit person who was used to that work, then you would go run with it, and you would be fairly, you'd end the day knackered, but you would know what you were doing, and it wouldn't be too. Yeah, what I mean is
you get used to the environment and you work according to the conditions.
Like it wasn't like people were going into an environment and then ending a day and being totally post-traumatic stress because the work was so intense There was a very kind of, they knew what they were doing in this environment.
Methodical.
Yeah, exactly. Really methodical.
Yeah.
They
And
had to be to earn money.
yeah. And with
Crawshay.
his lifestyle compared to the living conditions, how would that compare?
Well, it compare in the same way as lots of things obviously compare. So if you are, for instance, William Crawshay II now, was the third generation of Crawshay ironmaster. His grandfather died with holdings and shares and monies that were worth 1.5 million in 1810. So that's an astronomical figure. And so his son, and then his son obviously, by that point, Richard Crawshay was from a farming background, left, didn't have anything, and then totally made everything himself, 100%. But then his family subsequently were used to a certain way of life and a certain level of living, and they obviously wouldn't want to live in a pokey house that they would expect a worker to live in, for instance. But then equally, the housing that was in Merthyr was fairly good quality, a lot of it.
Was there a lot of resentment?
At this stage, in the early 19th century. It was only as the 19th century progressed, when there was more of an influx of worker, constantly every 10 to 15 years, there was thousands upon thousands more coming in. Then the need for housing and the housing crisis got into full swing. But in that early period, you know, it's testament to the early workers' housing, that the majority of the workers' housing that they built is still standing now. You know, Williamstown and Castle Square,
a bit like
and
the
things.
Bournevilles and people like that, isn't it? Built for the workers.
Exactly. When it was the ironmasters building, for the most part, there is some exceptions to the rule, definitely in Merthyr as well as other places.
I'm just trying to work out the lifestyle of, you know, because there's a close proximity, isn't there, between the worker and the sort of boss, you know, the owner of the company. How was he viewed then?
He was viewed quite well, to be fair.
Was he? Oh,
yeah.
So I thought that he was.
No, it was only later. His son Robert Thompson Crawshay was kind of vilified and made a lot of bad, hasty decisions because of a variety of different reasons, really. And it was him that left over that kind of legacy of the Crawshay name being a bad thing, essentially.
Which one was he then?
Robert Thompson Crawshay. Now, he made many kind of bad business decisions, essentially, which led to the failure and the eventual closure of the works. And so if you close the works down on a bad business decision and put 5,000 people out of work instantly, and then all the thousands more that were reliant on those 5,000 people, then you're not going to be much liked at all, really. But William II, he was very well liked and respected locally. For the most part, there were certainly people who thought he was strange and extreme, but they were the vast majority of opinion that's left behind these days is that he was a fair ironmaster.
So the Robert Thompson, was it the third, you say?
Not Robert Thompson Crawshay, so he was the fourth Crawshay.
Fourth. He was the one that was handed down all the stuff, so he was already born with a silver spoon in his mouth, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he basically got it wrong. He speculated and lost a lot of money, and was he indulgent with his lifestyle?
No, and there's no real straight nice answers to it, because it's so complex. The whole iron trade in Wales, in South Wales at that point, was in a total depression because of events on the continent, in America, in Russia, everywhere. The all world events were affecting the iron trade in Merthyr because the iron trade was a global thing. It went all over the world, you know.
So has it been tried out completely, the mines, the iron?
Nowhere near.
So what is it that...
The problem was getting the quantities they needed from the areas that they owned. So by early on, right, I'll make it as painless as possible.
Protests, there are people who aren't happy with what happened, are there? Why aren't they happy?
Well, because they didn't have a place to work anymore, with the Crawshays as an example. Anyway.
No, I mean the protesters now, with the iron and things like that, they're saying that the land was pillaged, so to speak, of iron.
I don't know who's saying that. I don't know who's saying that the land was pillaged of iron. But
I was talking to that lady and I said there are people that aren't happy.
Oh no, I don't know about them. But there's certainly loads of coal left in Merthyr and certainly quite a substantial amount of ironstone. But the problem being is getting the quality of the ironstone dipped. But as the processes for making iron grew more and more complex and grew more and more mechanized, the quality of iron was the be all and end all, the quality of that ironstone. Because obviously, if you've got bad quality ironstone at the start, then you're not going to have a good iron at the end.
Yeah.
And the quality of ironstone in Merthyr was a bit substandard by the 1840s, 50s.
Right.
And so they were importing it from Spain, which was a bit more higher quality iron. But then obviously it led to the question, well, why are we going around houses basically and coming to you when you were getting it from your people who were building ironworks and businesses closer to the source are then obviously going to be able to be more beneficial, like we were at the start of the 19th century. We built ourselves close to the source.
Yeah.
And at that stage, the ironstone was good quality and everything, good for that period, and it was all good. But then as it went on, competition was more rife and they needed a higher quality of ironstone than Merthyr could provide. Now coal, there's loads of coal left in Merthyr, but the way they was mined and all that, it's a problem getting at it now in terms of danger.
Yeah. Was there, so the workers looked upon the last Robert Thompson IV?
Robert Thompson, the fourth Crawshay, basically.
Yeah. So how did they look upon him?
Well, they looked upon him at the start very well, and then at the end, like he was a tyrant essentially. At the start, when he took over management of the ironworks in 1846, he took over full management as a wedding gift basically. He was running it loosely before that, but then as a wedding gift to from his father on his wedding day, his father basically put him on paper as being the overall general manager for the ironworks from 1846. When he came back from his wedding in London, the old town was in absolute party mode. Bunting all up and down the high street, all from the bottom of the town right up to the top. They baked him cakes, they did parties, they had massive wagon sheds done out to celebrate him coming back. And that was only for one reason, because he was setting up his family and his life at Merthyr. And so that was a symbol of the ongoing prosperity basically. If they were here and they are staying here, then Merthyr's continuing to prosper essentially.
Did he live here?
Yeah, yeah. And basically, as time went on then, when all these different factors, from the price of iron to the quality of iron to depression in the markets and all that, as soon as that took its toll, basically then he was left with the decision to cut workers and sack people and cut miners and cut workers' wages. But the workers at that point were very much of one mind. We're all together in this. You cannot cut our wages, we'll strike en masse. Because he was so kind of far gone by that stage, he had a stroke which made him stone deaf, and over a period of 19 years he became a very different type of guy really. And so by 1875 they give him that option. He gave the workers an option of having their wages cut, they give him the option back of us striking, and he gave them the final option of, if you strike I'll close everything down and that'll be the end of it. And that's exactly what happened. They struck and he closed everything down, and 5,000 odd people were put out of employment fairly rapidly. And you don't get away with making stupid decisions like that unscathed by in history.
It's interesting. Maybe we'll work on the last guy, Robert Thompson.
So what kind of...
Crawshay. We're trying to find a juicy storyline that has got, we're trying to affiliate it with this house.
Right.
And you know the correlation either between the, because I thought that he may have exploited. This is what I was sort of led to believe.
No, it's all to do with kind of, if you kind of went back now with your kind of upbringing and you were influences from growing up in our society today, then you would probably think there is quite a bit of exploitation. But it's exactly the same as kind of looking at a business like T-Mobile, for instance, right? If T-Mobile start cutting their workers' wages, you don't think the owner of T-Mobile is, you know, a tyrant or a villain or anything like that. But
it's all pro-rata to the times, isn't it? But also, he seems to have lost his vision.
His hearing, and he,
I mean his.
Oh yeah, his vision for the future of the works.
His vision, like his forefathers were visionaries. He was almost he wasn't quite as good at speculating.
Spot on, yeah, spot on. Yeah. His father said that he was no good, that his deafness made him no good for nothing apart from fishing, which is a lovely thing to say.
It's mostly I guess normally a demonisation of the fourth one that I know the best story about.
Yeah.
It's probably that's mostly him I've been talking about all day. It is him they buried with the big slab of it.
Exactly right. And that again stoked loads of
Full
mythology
propaganda
and everything, but all that was his own. You know, he wrote down in his will the dimensions and depth of the grave and the stone that was used and everything like that. But locally, you know, it was like lumped on his grave to stop him getting out, or because he wanted to keep his riches under there. And I've heard everything about it, man. But there's so many myths that come in the aftermath from it. If you look at it kind of cleanly, both parties knew the one couldn't exist without the other. If they hadn't come here and started taking the ironstone out, then these workers wouldn't have come here. And if they didn't have the workers to attract them to come here to get the ironstone in the first place, they wouldn't have this house around them. And so both knew that it was a massively mutually beneficial relationship. But then Robert just got very kind of embittered and, as you said quite rightly, like lost vision and just didn't see things as he used to.
Storm the house at one point. Was that a mythology?
No.
Was that part of the strike that happened as well?
That's kind of a bit of mythology, really. Like this tied up with the 1831 rising. That is, but people say that they stormed and shot at the house, but there's no real truth in it.
Was that part of the Chartist movement?
Previous, before the Chartist movement. The Chartist movement came into being in 1838.
After this had all come and gone.
Yeah, but the people who took part in that rising kind of worked the Chartists and were going by all the methods and all the things that the Chartists would put to paper and officially call themselves Chartists a couple of years later. Right. So they were effectively Chartists just before the phrase.
I've seen they're currently having a festival in Merthyr called the Merthyr Revolution, the Merthyr Rising.
Merthyr Rising,
Merthyr Rising.
Which is again 1831. That's referring to.
It's all about the big revolt of workers and the mass
exactly, yeah.
Right.
But even that's strange because there was two other riots in Merthyr which had equally same amount of thousands going, but it didn't have martyrdom and all these things attached to it and all this kind of symbology attached to it. So
the red flag and the
and
we won't be moved.
And if you put that in it changes everything quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it's a better story.
It's a people's history with history. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Sorry,
I haven't got juicy stories.
I've been saying the mythology all day now. I realise I'm wrong now.
Alright.
Yeah. Oh no, he was horrible apparently. That's what everyone's told me all my life, so I'm just sort of repeating.
I know, but I probably wouldn't have liked him. You know, he was a rich guy who owned a substantial amount of land and ownings, but again, he was a lot fairer to his workers than the vast majority of iron masters in South Wales, by quite a substantial margin.
Fair enough.
In many different ways as well. The working conditions were far better in Cyfarthfa than anywhere else in South Wales as well in terms of ironworks. Like Dowlais was cramped and packed together because they wanted more and more furnaces to make more and more iron.
Is it just in the industrial estate down there? What's left of it?
The blast furnaces that are there now, the 6 blast furnaces.
It's just the arcs now, isn't it?
They are the blast furnaces,
right.
There's 6 blast furnaces behind that facade of sandstone, see there.
Right.
And they're made out of like fire clay bricks and stuff like that. But you can see some of them, if you go in, you can see the kind of curvature of them through little arches, and you can see that in there, but the blast furnaces there.
Right, okay.
There we go,
that's a bit, I think. That's it.
Let's get it on.
Probably confused why I was saying some stuff and now you've said other stuff and now so. It's like someone said, movie voice made by the people more than it is by the everything else.
Definitely.
Don't believe everything you read in books.
No, just go for yourself, read it for yourself. That's exactly what I've done. And again, if you're just looking at it as facts on paper, really it's hard to outrightly say
anything.
He's a villain and they're in the right or they're in the wrong.
Everything post Crawshay would say that he was bad, and everything pre Crawshay would say that he was good, strange, and then
100%. It knocks down the middle then. But I think it's quite telling how they only get a bad rep when he's left.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough. The town kind of relied on him in a lot of ways. So what are you going to do with it? But I will leave you to it now. If you need anything else, just ask the girls on the desk.
Alright.
I'll pop out.
Thank you.
I hope your friends are alright and I haven't depressed her too much.